My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. Just a few years ago, my name was synonymous with cutting-edge oceanographic research conducted under the auspices of NASA. Yes, that's right. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration had, and perhaps still does, a division whose primary mission was the study of deep-sea life. This fact often surprises the uninitiated, who are accustomed to associating NASA solely with space exploration, stars, and distant planets. Yet, the logic behind it was undeniable. The ocean depths of our own planet remain territory as unexplored as the surface of the Moon or Mars, and the conditions there can be just as extreme. NASA's funding and technological capabilities allowed for expeditions and equipment development beyond the reach of most purely oceanographic institutions. Our division was tasked with cataloging the flora and fauna of the world's oceans, paying particular attention to the abyssal and hadal zones, those dark, cold abysses where pressures reach monstrous levels. We collected samples, mapped the seabed, analyzed the chemical composition of the water and bottom sediments. The work was painstaking, demanding incredible patience and precision. We utilized remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, submersibles capable of withstanding colossal pressure, and highly complex sonar and sensor systems. Aboard our research vessels, there was always an atmosphere of focused exploration, an anticipation of discovery. We knew the ocean covers more than 70% of the Earth's surface, and we were acutely aware of how small a fraction of this aquatic world humanity has truly explored. The common perception of the Mariana Trench as the planet's deepest point doesn't fully capture the reality. There exist vast, interconnected systems of underwater caves and canyons that plunge far deeper than the known trenches. Some of these systems are comparable in scale to entire mountain ranges on land, yet they lie hidden beneath miles of water in a darkness never touched by sunlight. It was there, in those unexplored labyrinths, that life forms lurked, forms whose existence we could only guess at. Officially, our mission was to expand knowledge of the planet's biodiversity, search for new species, and study the adaptations of organisms to extreme conditions. This data could be significant not only for biology, but also for developing technologies for survival in hostile environments, including space. At least, that was the official story. But there was another side to our work, one that wasn't written about in scientific journals or mentioned at press conferences. My small research team within the division dealt with phenomena that fell outside the scope of standard oceanography. We encountered anomalies that didn't fit known scientific paradigms. And it was this research that ultimately led to me and my closest colleagues being quietly, without fanfare, dismissed from NASA. Our entire line of research was shut down, the personnel completely replaced, and the freed-up resources redirected to space programs. I have to give management credit, though. After what I'd been through, I myself had lost any desire to continue plunging into those depths. I want to emphasize, the vast majority of personnel in our oceanographic division were genuinely engaged in the routine study of marine life and had no connection whatsoever to the specific phenomena that came to my team's attention. Therefore, information about the events I am about to describe never became public knowledge, at least not as far as I know. I am intentionally remaining anonymous. The reasons are compelling. The United States government prefers to keep such information under lock and key, and in my profession, people have disappeared for far less. Before I get to the heart of the matter, I must mention the recent tragedy involving the submersible that imploded during its descent. It was a horrific event, and I have strong reasons to believe I know the true cause of the implosion. Naturally, it differs from the version presented to the public, but more on that later. Right now, I want to detail several incidents that I firmly believe the public needs to know about. My specialty within NASA's Oceanographic Division involved bioacoustics and the analysis of sensor data from deep-sea vehicles. I wasn't a biologist in the traditional sense, more of an analyst, an interpreter of signals from the abyss. My team consisted of just 4 people, including myself. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a marine biologist with unique expertise in deep-sea ecosystems. Mark Chen, a robotics and remote-controlled genius capable of making our underwater vehicles perform incredible maneuvers. And Sam Johnson, a specialist in sonar and seabed mapping, whose ears, we joked, could distinguish a shrimp's click from miles away. We were based at a research center on the Oregon coast, in the small town of Port Orford, whose life was inextricably linked to the ocean and the scientific projects conducted nearby. Our office was located in an unassuming building on the outskirts, giving no hint of its connection to NASA. We spent most of our time either in the lab, analyzing gigabytes of data streamed from research vessels, or directly on those vessels during months-long expeditions. Our routine work involved studying the soundscapes of the deep. We recorded and classified sounds made by known marine inhabitants, tracked whale migrations through their songs, attempted to decipher the complex acoustic signals of dolphins. We also used active sonar to create detailed maps of the seabed, search for hydrothermal vents and underwater volcanoes, and study currents. Occasionally, we stumbled upon unknown sounds, strange clicks, low-frequency hums, complex pulse sequences that didn't match any known biological or geological source. It was these acoustic phantoms that constituted the unofficial part of our work. We logged them, trying to determine their source, nature, and behavior. Most often, they turned out to be rare geological phenomena or equipment malfunctions. But sometimes the sounds defied explanation. The first hints that something entirely different lurked in the depths appeared long before the incidents that led to our dismissal. Several times, our deep-sea vehicles, operating at depths exceeding 20,000 feet, registered brief but extremely powerful energy spikes of unknown origin. Pressure sensors showed localized anomalies, as if something massive passed close to the vehicle, yet the sonar detected nothing. On another occasion, one of our ROVs, equipped with high-resolution cameras, transmitted a series of images showing fleeting, fast-moving shadows of unnatural size in the impenetrable darkness. The images were blurred, indistinct, but enough to cause us serious concern. We also recorded strange damage to equipment lowered to great depths, deep scratches on titanium hulls, signs of incredible crushing forces, torn cables, all officially attributed to collisions with underwater rocks or pressure. But Sam Johnson and I harbored doubts. The nature of the damage sometimes looked as if it had been inflicted intentionally. We shared our observations with management, submitted reports, but they were met with skepticism. Within NASA's vast bureaucracy, our acoustic phantoms and unexplained damage seemed like minor curiosities against the backdrop of grand plans for exploring the ocean and space. We were gently asked to focus on our primary tasks, not to get distracted by ghosts. However, we continued to collect data, creating a secret database of anomalous phenomena. We felt we were on the verge of something significant, perhaps terrifying. The atmosphere within our small team grew increasingly tense. Scientific curiosity warred with an underlying sense of dread. We understood that the ocean depths were not just dark, cold water. They were an entire universe, operating under its own laws, and we were merely uninvited guests in a world about which we knew frighteningly little. The real turning point came when a major private corporation, Omni-Shore Dynamics, involved in deep-sea oil and gas extraction, approached NASA. Their request concerned inexplicable problems at one of their most advanced drilling platforms. Collaboration between NASA and private corporations wasn't unheard of. Often, the agency's technological developments found applications in industry, and corporations, in turn, provided access to their resources and facilities for scientific research. The request from Omni-Shore Dynamics initially seemed like a standard case for technical consultation. Their newest deep-water drilling platform, the Keystone platform, located hundreds of miles off the coast of California above the Monterey Canyon, had encountered a series of strange incidents. They reported damage to metal structures near the very base of the platform, at a depth of about 10,000 feet. Initial reports from Omni-Shore engineers were vague. They spoke of deformed supports, torn pipeline sections, deep grooves scored into high-strength alloys. The causes of the damage remained unclear. Standard explanations, corrosion, metal fatigue, seismic activity, were not supported by monitoring data. The platform was equipped with the most modern sensor systems, and none had recorded anything unusual that could lead to such destruction. The corporation conducted several inspections with its own underwater vehicles, but failed to get a clear picture. The water at that depth was too murky due to bottom sediments, and the damage was located in hard-to-reach areas of the complex subsea structure. That's when Omni-Shore turned to us. They were interested in our advanced imaging and analysis technologies, as well as our experience working at extreme depths. NASA management, seeing the potential for acquiring unique data and the opportunity to test new equipment in real-world conditions, authorized a joint project. Our team, myself, Evelyn, Mark, and Sam, was assigned scientific responsibility. We were to travel on the research vessel RV Pathfinder to the Keystone platform, deploy our equipment, and try to determine the cause of the mysterious damage. The initial plan involved using our most powerful sonars and high-resolution cameras mounted on the ROV Argus 7. We were to conduct a detailed survey of the platform's underwater section, create a three-dimensional model of the damage, and collect metal samples for lab analysis. However, representatives from Omni-Shore Dynamics pushed for more decisive action. They wanted not just to understand the cause, but also to assess the feasibility of repairs and the potential threat to the entire structure as quickly as possible. Therefore, it was decided to include a team of 3 professional deep-sea divers in the expedition, equipped with the latest atmospheric diving suits capable of withstanding immense pressure. Their task was to conduct a visual inspection of the most critical nodes and possibly perform some preliminary repair work under our observation from the Pathfinder. The idea of sending people to such a depth for direct contact with an unknown problem filled me with serious apprehension. 10,000 feet is not a stroll along a reef. The pressure is monstrous, the temperature near freezing, visibility practically non-existent. Any unexpected situation could be fatal. I voiced my concerns to Evelyn and Sam. Evelyn shared my anxiety from a biological perspective. There was no telling what might inhabit the area near the platform or how it might react to human presence. Sam was worried about the acoustic anomalies he had occasionally registered in the area, even before Omni-Shore's request. Short, powerful, low-frequency pulses with no clear source. Mark, ever the pragmatist, focused on the technical aspects of ensuring dive safety. Despite our misgivings, the decision was made. Pressure from the corporation and NASA's desire to showcase its capabilities outweighed caution. Preparations for the expedition proceeded at an accelerated pace. We calibrated equipment, checked communication systems, ran dive simulations. The Omni-Shore divers, experienced professionals, Jacob Miller, the team leader, Lee Chen, no relation to our Mark, and Carlos Rodriguez, received their final briefings. The atmosphere aboard the Pathfinder as we finally set sail for the Keystone platform was tense. This wasn't just a scientific mission. It was a plunge into the unknown, where the price of error could be human life. The journey to the Keystone platform took nearly 2 days. The RV Pathfinder cut steadily through the gray steel waves of the Pacific under a low, overcast sky. As we neared our destination, the tension aboard increased. My team and I worked almost without sleep, performing final equipment checks. Mark Chen worked his magic on the control systems of the Argus 7, our primary ROV, which was to accompany the divers and provide us with video feeds and data. Sam Johnson continuously monitored the ocean through hydrophones, trying to catch any unusual signals near the platform. Evelyn Reed studied the latest Omnishore reports and data on biological activity in this deep-sea sector, trying to anticipate possible encounters with unknown life forms. I coordinated the group's actions and liaised with the dive team and the corporate representatives also on board. Finally, the silhouette of the Keystone platform appeared on the horizon, a gigantic steel structure rising above the water, a symbol of human ambition to conquer the depths. Beneath us, nearly 2 miles down, lay its submerged portion, the place where the mystery resided. The weather was choppy, but conditions permitted the operation to begin. The dive was scheduled for dawn the next day. The last night before the descent was long. I barely slept, replaying every possible scenario in my mind. The anxiety wouldn't leave me. The next morning, after a final briefing, the descent procedure began. The 3 divers, Miller, Chen, and Rodriguez, clad in bulky but high-tech deep-sea suits resembling personal submarines, took their places in a special launch and recovery system, LARS, cage. Their faces behind the sealed helmets were focused and serious. The cage was slowly lowered over the side and began its long journey into the abyss. Simultaneously, Mark began deploying the Argus 7. On the large monitors in the Pathfinder's control room, we watched the feed from the ROV's cameras and the divers' telemetry: depth, pressure, oxygen levels, heart rates. The descent took over an hour. Yard by yard, the depth readings climbed, and the light outside the cage's viewports and the Argus's lenses faded, eventually yielding to absolute, impenetrable darkness, pierced only by the powerful beams of their lights. Finally, the cage reached the target depth near the platform's base. The Argus 7 took up position nearby, illuminating the surrounding space. A grand and simultaneously unnerving scene appeared on the screens. Colossal steel supports ascended into the gloom, coated in silt and sparse colonies of deep-sea organisms. The divers exited the cage and began moving slowly towards the damaged area, their movements seemingly slowed by the dense, cold water. Their lights carved sections of mangled metal out of the darkness. The damage was severe. Thick steel beams were crumpled like paper. Deep, parallel grooves, whose origin was utterly baffling, scored the surface. This didn't look like the result of a collision or material fatigue. Visual on the primary damage zone. Damage is significant. Structure is deformed. Miller's calm voice came through the comms. Confirming. Looks like claw marks? But huge, Chen added, his voice tinged with surprise. Rodriguez silently inspected another support, aiming his light beam at deep indentations. Evelyn, Sam, and I exchanged uneasy glances. Claw marks at 10,000 feet? Sam increased the sensitivity of the Argus's hydrophones. Silence. Only the monotonous hum of the platform's equipment and the barely perceptible crackle of static. The divers worked methodically, approaching the most heavily damaged sections. The Argus 7, piloted by Mark, maneuvered around them, providing maximum visibility. And then, the first strange thing happened. The image from the Argus's main camera flickered for a moment, static washing across the screen. Interference? Mark, check the signal, I said into the microphone. Signal stable, Eris. Might be a localized electromagnetic disturbance, Mark replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. At that moment, Sam jerked upright. Low-frequency pulse, very short but powerful, right near them. Almost simultaneously with his words, Rodriguez, who was slightly apart from the others, cried out. His figure on the screen jolted violently. Carlos! What happened? Miller yelled, turning towards him. Something grabbed my leg. I can't see. Rodriguez's voice was strained. His light beam darted wildly, illuminating only clouds of disturbed silt. The Argus swung around, its floodlights stabbing into the darkness toward him. And then we saw them. 3 enormous, dark shapes emerged silently from the gloom. What materialized before the lenses of the Argus 7 and the eyes of the terrified divers defied any rational explanation within the bounds of known biology. They were gigantic creatures, vaguely resembling cephalopods, but dwarfing anything we had ever seen or imagined possible. Their bodies were streamlined, their color ranging from inky black to deep violet, rendering them nearly invisible in the surrounding darkness until caught directly in a spotlight beam. Estimating their exact size was difficult, but each seemed no smaller than a bus. Numerous thick tentacles, far more than 10, radiated from a central body covered in rows of powerful suckers. Their eyes, huge, unblinking orbs, glowed with a faint internal light, hinting at an intelligence that felt cold and alien. They moved with an incredible grace and speed for their size, gliding silently through the water. These 3 beings encircled the divers and the Argus, acting with astonishing coordination. It became terrifyingly clear that the damage to the platform wasn't random. It was bait. They had been waiting. Rodriguez was the first target. One of the creatures wrapped a massive tentacle around his leg. Despite the suit's durability, the diver screamed in pain. The crushing force was unbelievable. He struggled, striking at the tentacle with a tool resembling a small hydraulic cutter, but to no avail. The metal tool skittered uselessly across the monster's tough, resilient skin. Carlos, hang on! Miller and Chen tried to approach their comrade, but the other 2 creatures instantly blocked their path. Their movements were deliberate, calculated. They weren't just attacking, they were isolating their prey. What happened next plunged us into shock. The creature holding Rodriguez began to work methodically. One of its free tentacles located the life support backpack on the diver's suit. For a few moments, it seemed to probe the structure, as if understanding its function, and then, with horrific strength, it tore the vital unit away from the suit. Emergency indicators flashed. No, his system. They ripped off his tanks. Mark yelled, watching helplessly. Rodriguez thrashed in agony, but the grip was ironclad. Another tentacle wrapped around his helmet, squeezing. We heard his choked breathing, then a final gurgle, and then silence. The life sign indicators on our monitor flatlined. Miller and Chen were paralyzed by horror, but the instinct for self-preservation spurred them into action. Chen attempted to use a flare gun, but one of the creatures whipped a tentacle around his arm with lightning speed, wrenching the weapon away. Then, the second creature approached him from behind. We saw its skin begin to ripple with complex, mesmerizing patterns of light, flashing and fading blues, greens, reds. It was a distraction. While Chen stared, captivated by the light show, the first creature located and, with incredible precision, detached his swim fins, robbing him of maneuverability. Then, one of its tentacles wrapped around his neck, over the suit, beginning a slow constriction. We watched Chen struggle, his movements growing weaker. It was sickeningly clear the creature understood how humans breathed and was deliberately cutting off his air supply, even through the layers of the suit. Miller, witnessing the demise of his comrades, was driven to desperation. He activated his dive knife, a sizable blade designed for cutting lines. He lunged at the nearest creature, attempting to strike its massive body. The knife sank into the flesh, but the creature seemed barely to notice. It simply retracted the tentacle, which now bore only a shallow gash, and he hit Miller backhand with such force that he flew back several yards, slamming into a platform support. His indicators flickered and died. It was all over in minutes. 3 experienced divers in state-of-the-art suits, destroyed with cold, calculated efficiency. The creatures demonstrated not only immense strength, but also astonishing intelligence, an understanding of human equipment, and tactical thinking. They worked as a unit. A stunned silence gripped the control room of the Pathfinder. We had just witnessed the deaths of 3 men, killed by beings whose very existence seemed impossible. Mark frantically maneuvered the Argus, trying to pull the ROV away from the kill zone, but one of the creatures had already turned its attention toward it. It advanced slowly on our ROV, its enormous eye staring, unblinking, directly into the camera lens. The giant, cephalopod-like monster closed in on the Argus 7. Its inky black body nearly merged with the darkness, only the faint glow of its massive eye and the reflections from the ROV's lights betraying its presence. Its tentacles writhed languidly, each as thick as a tree trunk. On the monitor in the Pathfinder's control room, we watched its approach with horrifying clarity. My heart hammered against my ribs. After the cold-blooded execution of the divers, there was no doubt about this creature's intentions. "Mark, get it out of there! Faster!" My voice came out hoarse. Mark Chen, pale but composed, desperately worked the joysticks. The Argus's thrusters screamed at maximum power, churning up clouds of silt from the seabed. The ROV shot upwards, trying to escape its pursuer, but the creature was unexpectedly fast. It surged after us, easily matching our machine's speed. One of its tentacles lashed out, aiming for the umbilical cable connecting the Argus to the ship. If it severed the cable, we would lose the ROV and the only visual evidence of what had happened. "Can't shake it. It's too close," Mark gasped. At that critical moment, something unforeseen occurred. Jacob Miller, whom we had presumed dead, stirred. The impact against the platform had apparently only knocked him unconscious and damaged his telemetry, not killed him. He saw the creature pursuing the Argus and realized it was the only chance to get the information to the surface. Gathering his last reserves of strength, Miller located the object that had fallen from Chen's grasp during the attack: the flare gun. Deep-sea gear included special underwater flares designed for marking locations in emergencies. They burned even underwater, emitting intense light and heat. With a trembling hand, Miller aimed the gun not upwards, but towards the monster closing in on the Argus, and pulled the trigger. A brilliant red flash pierced the gloom. The flare struck the creature squarely in its body. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The monster emitted a silent scream that we felt as a powerful vibration, even through the Argus's hull. Its body convulsed, the skin around the flare's impact blistering and blackening. The creature recoiled sharply from the rove, its movements becoming erratic. It was clearly in agony. The bright fire of the flare, burning directly on its flesh, caused it unbearable pain. The other two creatures, which had been occupied with the bodies of Chen and Rodriguez, reacted instantly to their companion's distress. They converged on it, trying to bat the flare away with their tentacles, only increasing their own panic. "Fire. Their weakness is fire," Evelyn exclaimed, her eyes wide with sudden realization. While the monsters were preoccupied with the burning flare and their injured comrade, Mark seized the opportunity. He piloted the Argus straight up, pushing all thrusters to their limits. Miller, seeing the ROV escaping, made one final gesture. He activated the emergency beacon on his suit. Then his body went limp. Whether he succumbed to his injuries or to decompression from the damaged suit, we never knew. We ascended with the Argus as fast as we possibly could, our eyes glued to the monitors. The creatures, abandoning their wounded kin, made a brief attempt to give chase, but quickly fell behind. Perhaps the intense light and heat of the flare had disoriented them, or inflicted enough damage to slow them down. The ascent felt like an eternity. We feared the cable snapping, equipment failure, a renewed attack. Finally, the Argus 7 broke free from the 2-mile abyss and surfaced beside the Pathfinder. It was immediately hauled aboard. A deathly silence filled the control room, broken only by heavy breathing and the whir of equipment. We looked at each other, unable to find words. Horror, relief at recovering the Rove, and the sickening grief over the lost men churned into a heavy emotional cocktail. The first thing we did was copy and encrypt all recordings from the Argus's cameras and sensors. This was irrefutable proof. Then, I contacted NASA management and the Omni Shore Dynamics representatives, reporting what had happened in the barest terms, avoiding descriptions of the creatures. The official story for the public and even most of the Pathfinder's crew had been prepared in case of an accident. A tragic incident during a complex deep-sea dive caused by unforeseen technical malfunctions and the aggressive behavior of an unknown large marine animal, possibly a giant squid. The names of the dead divers were not to be linked to the true cause of their deaths. The cover-up began. We were ordered to abort the mission and return to port immediately. All data was classified top secret, for internal NASA use and authorized personnel only. Discussions about what we had seen among the four of us, myself, Evelyn, Mark, and Sam, happened in whispers, behind the closed doors of our cabins. We understood we had encountered something fundamentally new and incredibly dangerous. Intelligent, organized predators of immense size, inhabiting extreme depths, capable of turning human technology against humans. And they had a weakness: fire. But how could we use that knowledge? The return to Port Orford was grim. We handed over the encrypted data to a special courier from NASA. The Omni Shore Dynamics representatives disembarked, their faces unreadable. They had confirmation of the threat, but also a problem of gigantic proportions. Operations at the Keystone platform were suspended indefinitely under the guise of requiring major repairs. Our team found itself isolated. We were asked to sign additional non-disclosure agreements, backed by threats of the most severe consequences. Work in the Oceanographic Division continued, but under a dark cloud. We knew what lurked below, and that knowledge was a heavy burden. After the incident at the Keystone platform, our small team found itself in a strange position. On one hand, we possessed unique, explosive information. On the other, our hands were tied by secrecy orders and constant, unspoken surveillance by NASA security. Officially, the investigation into the tragedy involving the Omni Shore Dynamics divers was closed, citing an accident under extreme conditions. Our role was reduced to providing technical data from the Argus 7, carefully filtered and stripped of any images of the creatures themselves. We continued our routine work, analyzing acoustic data, mapping. But now, every rove dive, every unexplained shadow on the sonar, triggered a cold spike of anxiety. We knew they were down there. Were they waiting? Watching? Evelyn Reed immersed herself in cephalopod biology, trying to find any analogs or clues in known science, but it was futile. The creatures from the Keystone platform were beyond anything described. Their size, intelligence, social organization, their ability to generate complex bioluminescent patterns. It all pointed to an entirely separate branch of evolution, developed over millions of years in the isolation of the deepest trenches. Mark Chen focused on upgrading the underwater vehicles, attempting to develop non-lethal defense systems based on light and heat pulses, leveraging the only known vulnerability of these beings. Sam Johnson redoubled his efforts listening to the depths, cataloging every recorded anomalous low-frequency signal, trying to identify patterns in their occurrences. I found myself caught between a rock and a hard place, coordinating the team's work while constantly reporting to a management that seemed eager to forget the incident, yet couldn't ignore the potential threat. About a year after the Keystone platform events, we were assigned a new task that initially seemed completely unrelated to our previous experience. It involved participating in a U.S. Navy search operation. Decades earlier, during World War I, a large American naval transport, the USS Cyclops, had vanished without a trace in the Atlantic Ocean. The ship, carrying over 300 souls, simply disappeared. No distress signal, no evidence of attack or storm. Its disappearance became one of the greatest mysteries in U.S. naval history. Now, thanks to new satellite data analysis techniques and complex oceanographic models, the Navy had pinpointed a possible location for the wreckage. The search area was in a deep water zone of the Bermuda Triangle, a place steeped in legend and notorious for vanishing ships and planes. We were brought into the operation because of our expertise in deep-sea mapping and ROV use. The official objective: find and identify the wreckage of the USS Cyclops, attempt to determine the cause of its loss, and, if possible, recover the ship's log or other artifacts that could shed light on the mystery. The ship conducting the search, originally a Navy vessel, was temporarily renamed USS Acheron for this mission, likely to avoid undue attention. The name, referencing the River of Sorrow from Greek mythology, felt ominously appropriate. Once again, we set out on the RV Pathfinder, this time into the Atlantic. On board, besides our team, were Navy officers and historians. The atmosphere was professional, but an undercurrent of excitement was palpable. We might be about to solve a century-old mystery. The search took several weeks. We methodically scanned square after square of the seabed at depths exceeding 13,000 feet. Sam Johnson worked the side-scan sonar, creating detailed relief maps. Finally, an image revealed structures resembling the wreckage of a large vessel. Mark Chen prepared the Argus 7 for the dive. This time, the ROV was equipped with extra manipulators for artifact recovery and enhanced lighting. The descent into the dark Atlantic waters began. As we neared the bottom, the tension mounted. What would we find? Just wreckage consumed by time and salt water? Or something more? When the Argus's lights first illuminated the outlines of the sunken ship in the gloom, it was clear. This was her. The USS Acheron, formerly Cyclops, lay on the seabed, broken into several large sections. The hull was heavily corroded, but the overall shape was unmistakable. We began a slow flyby of the wreckage, documenting every detail. The ship rested in an area with no strong currents, so the debris wasn't widely scattered. However, the nature of the damage raised immediate questions for us. Besides the obvious destruction from impact and time, certain metal structures bore strange, deep indentations and grooves, chillingly reminiscent of what we'd seen on the Keystone platform. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be possible? A connection between an incident at a modern drilling platform in the Pacific and the loss of a century-old warship in the Atlantic. The thought seemed preposterous, yet the visual similarity of the damage was hard to ignore. Slowly, methodically, the Argus 7 surveyed the wreckage of the USS Acheron. High-resolution cameras transmitted clear images of twisted metal encrusted with deep-sea sponges and corals back to the Pathfinder. We moved along the fractured hull, recording every detail. The Navy officers and historians gathered in the control room stared intently at the monitors, commenting on the ship's structural features, trying to piece together the disaster from the patterns of destruction. But for us, myself, Evelyn, Mark, and Sam, the focus remained on those strange points of damage. Deep, parallel gouges on armored plating, massive indentations on the superstructure, pieces of metal torn away with incredible force. None of it fit neatly with the theory of a storm or an internal explosion. Evelyn pointed to a section of the hull where the steel was literally crushed inward, forming several huge circular depressions with ragged edges. "Looks like marks from giant suckers," she whispered, so quietly only our team could hear. Sam nodded silently, his gaze fixed on the Argus's sonar display, which was registering faint fluctuations in the surrounding water. No distinct targets, but something was disturbing the perfect stillness of the abyss. Our primary objective was to locate the bridge and, hopefully, the safe containing the ship's log. According to the blueprints, the bridge was in the forward section of the ship, which was relatively intact. Mark Chen carefully navigated the Argus through a breach in the deck into the dilapidated interior spaces. Particles of silt and debris floated in the beams of the ROV's lights. Internal bulkheads were warped, equipment torn from its mountings. The atmosphere inside the sunken vessel was oppressive. Finally, we reached a space that, by all indications, was the captain's bridge. The helm, remnants of the instrument panel, shattered portholes. And in a corner, almost buried under debris, we spotted a heavy metal safe. "There, we found it," one of the historians exclaimed. Now came the most delicate part of the operation. Mark needed to use the Argus's manipulators to clear the debris and either attempt to open the safe on site or, preferably, detach it from the deck and lift it to the surface. It was painstaking work. The Argus's manipulators, designed for collecting sediment samples or placing sensors, struggled with the heavy wreckage. Mark operated with extreme caution, clearing access to the safe inch by inch. Any clumsy move could cause structures to collapse or damage the safe itself. It took several tense hours. Everyone in the control room held their breath, watching the slow dance of the mechanical arms on the screens. At last, the safe was free. It appeared relatively undamaged, though coated in a thick layer of rust and marine deposits. The next challenge was securing it in the Argus's special recovery basket. This also proved difficult due to the object's weight and awkward shape. After several failed attempts, Mark managed to secure the safe firmly. "Beginning ascent. Slow and steady," Mark reported. The Argus 7, carrying its precious and heavy cargo, began its slow journey upwards. 2.5 miles of water separated us from the surface. The ascent took several more hours. We never took our eyes off the depth gauges, and the camera feed focused on the safe. The anxiety lingered. Too many things felt strange about this story. The ship's disappearance, the location of its discovery, the nature of the damage. When the Argus was finally lifted onto the deck of the Pathfinder, along with the massive, rusty safe, a wave of relief washed over everyone. The first part of the mission was complete. Now came the most intriguing part: opening the safe and discovering the secrets it held. The safe was moved to a specially equipped lab on board. Navy specialists immediately went to work. Opening an old safe that had spent a century on the ocean floor is no trivial task. They used specialized tools, rust solvents, X-ray scanning. The process took nearly a full day. We waited impatiently. Finally, the safe door yielded. Inside, to the astonishment and joy of everyone present, nestled within a relatively watertight container, was the logbook of the USS Acheron. The pages had suffered from time and moisture, of course, but much of the writing was legible. The logbook was immediately handed over to the Navy historians and cryptographers for deciphering and analysis. As NASA personnel, our access to its contents was restricted. That was the protocol. However, the Navy liaison officer, with whom I had developed a trusting relationship during the expedition, understood our unspoken concern about the strange damage and promised to share information if the log contained anything outside the scope of standard maritime incidents. Several more days passed as the painstaking work of restoring and reading the faded entries continued. Then, late one evening, that same officer found me on deck. His face was grave and troubled. "Dr. Thorne," he said quietly, glancing around, "I think you and your team should know. The last entries in the log, they're unbelievable, and they seem directly relevant to what you might have already encountered." The Navy officer, let's call him Lieutenant Harrison, led me to his cabin. He made sure the door was securely closed and laid several printout sheets on the table, facsimile copies of the final pages from the USS Acheron's logbook, and a preliminary transcription of the most legible fragments. Harrison's voice was low, filled with a mixture of excitement and disbelief at what he'd read. "We haven't finished the full analysis yet, Dr. Thorne," he began. "But what we've already deciphered from the captain's final entries, it's mind-boggling. Officially, this isn't going anywhere yet, but given your team's background and the damage we saw on the hull, I felt obligated to show you this." I took the sheets. The captain's handwriting was uneven, rushed, almost illegible in places. The final entries were dated the night before the ship's disappearance. They described events unfolding with terrifying speed. The captain wrote of the sudden appearance from the depths of gigantic sea serpents, or colossal squids, that attacked the ship under the cover of darkness. The description of the creatures was chillingly familiar: inky black bodies, numerous powerful tentacles, huge, unblinking eyes, the ability to move with incredible speed. The captain noted their coordinated actions. They weren't just attacking randomly. They were systematically disabling the ship's vital systems. The steering gear and propellers were targeted first. Tentacles of unbelievable strength bent and broke metal, wrapped around the propeller shafts, completely immobilizing the vessel. Then the assault moved to the deck and superstructure. The creatures used their tentacles to rip away equipment, snap masts and funnels. The entries mentioned the crew's attempts to fight back with small arms and even small-caliber deck guns, but bullets and shells either caused no visible harm or the attackers dodged them with astonishing agility. The most horrifying passages described how the creatures began dragging men directly off the deck. Sailors attempting to resist, or simply caught in exposed areas, were seized by long, adhesive tentacles and pulled overboard into the black water. Screams of terror and despair mixed with the roar of a storm. The captain mentioned a sudden worsening of the weather, though forecasts for that day hadn't predicted a major storm, perhaps a localized squall or panic distorting perception. An attempt was made to launch lifeboats. A few boats with survivors managed to pull away from the sinking ship, but it wasn't salvation. The captain described with horror how giant shadows rose from the water beside the lifeboats, how tentacles snatched men right out of the boats and dragged them under. No one escaped. The final entry was clearly written in the flooding bridge. The ink had run, but the words were discernible. They are everywhere. Glowing patterns. God save our souls. My breath caught. The description of glowing patterns on the creatures' bodies, it matched what we'd witnessed during the attack on Chen near the Keystone platform. Back then, we'd speculated it was a distraction, but the Acheron captain's entry suggested something else. Was it some kind of ritualistic display? An expression of triumph, or even pleasure in the kill? This hypothesis, initially dismissed as too anthropomorphic after the platform incident, now found ominous corroboration from the past. "Do you understand what this means?" Harrison asked, seeing my reaction. I nodded slowly. It means the creatures from the Keystone platform aren't a unique phenomenon. They've been around for a long time, and they're responsible for at least one major maritime disappearance, maybe others attributed to the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. And they are incredibly dangerous, Harrison added. They're intelligent, organized, and view humans as prey or an interference. The information from the USS Acheron's logbook changed everything. These weren't just aggressive predators accidentally encountering humans. This was an ancient, intelligent life form, hidden in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the ocean, capable of complex tactical actions, and perhaps possessing its own alien motivations. It also made the cautious stance of NASA management, and clearly certain circles within the government and Navy, more understandable. Acknowledging the existence of such creatures wouldn't just cause panic. It would challenge humanity's very notion of its dominance on the planet. It would change everything. Maritime shipping, resource extraction, naval strategy. Harrison took the papers back. This information will be classified at the highest level, Dr. Thorne. The official report on the Acheron discovery will only contain general information about the wreckage condition and possibly mention a storm as the cause of loss. Not a word about the creatures. I understand, I replied. The burden of knowledge grew heavier. Now we knew not only what lurked in the deep, but how long it had been there, and what it was capable of. The Pathfinder's return to port was even more subdued than after the Keystone platform mission. My team and I exchanged few words, but the understanding between us was complete. We were keepers of a terrifying secret, one that stretched back over a century. The expedition to the wreck of the USS Acheron and the discovery of its logbook proved to be the final straw. Shortly after our return and the handover of all materials, both the official findings and the few fragments of truth Lieutenant Harrison had managed to share with me, things began to change. NASA's Oceanographic Division, once a promising frontier, started to be quietly dismantled. Funding was cut, long-term projects were shelved, and key personnel privy to the secrets of the Keystone platform and Acheron incidents, including my entire team, Evelyn, Mark, Sam, and myself, were called in for meetings, one by one. It wasn't like a standard layoff. It felt more like an offer we couldn't refuse. We were offered generous severance packages, the continuation of some benefits, and were strongly advised to change fields, signing even stricter non-disclosure agreements concerning our work on deep-sea projects. Any attempt to discuss the real reasons behind these recommendations was shut down, with references to national security and agency restructuring. It was clear. They were moving us out of sight to minimize the risk of leaks. NASA leadership, faced with a reality they couldn't control or study without unacceptable risk, had chosen the path of avoidance. The ocean depths had proven too dangerous a frontier. Resources were reallocated to the more predictable and, paradoxically, safer realm of space. Studying distant stars and planets seemed preferable to confronting intelligent, hostile predators in our own backyard, in the abysses of the world's oceans. For me, personally, this dismissal came as a kind of deliverance. After everything I had witnessed, the cold-blooded slaughter of the divers, reading the final words of the Acheron's captain, grasping the scale and antiquity of this hidden threat, I had lost any desire to return to the study of the deep. The knowledge pressed down on me, an unbearable weight. My dreams filled with gliding shadows, giant unblinking eyes, and the silent screams of drowning men. I moved away from Port Orford, changed my phone number, and cut most of my professional ties. I tried to live an ordinary life, but the shadow of the past followed me relentlessly. My colleagues went their separate ways. Evelyn Reed retreated into academia, focusing on safer aspects of marine biology. Mark Chen started a small robotics company, far removed from underwater exploration. Sam Johnson, the most sensitive among us, reportedly never fully recovered from the ordeal and led a reclusive life. We rarely communicate, understanding that our shared secret is a dangerous bond. Sometimes, rumors reach me of strange incidents at sea, unexplained disappearances of vessels or submersibles. Each time, a chill runs down my spine. The recent tragedy involving the private submersible bound for the Titanic, destroyed by pressure, sparked particular unease. The official explanation is implosion due to structural flaws, but I can't shake the thought. Was there external involvement? Did they encounter those who should not be disturbed? Those who jealously guard their abyssal domains. I decided to write this not to incite panic. As the few documented incidents suggest, these creatures generally keep to the immense depths rarely visited by humans. For the average sailor, fisherman, or tourist, they likely pose no direct threat. But for those working on deep-sea rigs, laying seabed cables, operating military submarines, or embarking on exploratory submersible expeditions into the planet's darkest corners, for them, my warning might be vital. We don't know their motives. Perhaps they only attack when disturbed, or when their usual deep-sea food sources dwindle. Despite their obvious intelligence, they don't seem capable of creating their own tools, only using or destroying those made by us. The government conceals their existence, perhaps fearing panic and economic collapse, perhaps because they see no way to counter them. They may view them as just another dangerous marine predator, like sharks or orcas, only much larger and smarter. But I am convinced they are something more. We are accustomed to thinking of ourselves as the apex predators on this planet. That is a complacent delusion. In the deepest, darkest parts of our own world, we are merely careless intruders in alien territory. And down there, we are far from the top of the food chain.